The Marlowe Street Murders, Part 2. Chapter 13, The Pen and the Mirror. The pen touched the page. Ink flowed like breath withheld too long. Scene 9, continued, the reader writes back. The moment the first word was written, the room changed. The light shifted subtly. The ticking clock on the wall stopped. Ezra looked up sharply from the corner. Jonathan's pen, scribbling notes, froze mid-stroke. Did anyone else? Yes, Eleanor whispered. I felt it. The act of writing wasn't just creating narrative. It was activating something older. Something built into the bones of the Box 13 journal. The sentence she wrote finished with a flourish. But the next line? Already there. Scene 10, the double writes first. She hadn't written that. Neither had the others. Jonathan said, "It's responding to you." "No," Eleanor replied. "It's responding to her." She rose, reached for her coat. Ezra frowned. "Where are you going?" "To the mirror," she said. "She's waiting." They returned to Raven's Higher printing works by lamplight. Fog draped over the windows like curtains drawn shut. Inside, the air was colder. Still. But the mirror was where it had been, framed in rust, glass warped with age and smoke. Eleanor approached slowly. The figure in the reflection was already there. Identical. Perfect. But this time, the reflection's lips moved independently. "You're late," the woman said, voice muffled through the glass. Eleanor stepped closer. "What are you?" The woman tilted her head. "The first version of the story. The one that never got written. The one who stayed behind when Graves stepped forward." Eleanor swallowed. "You're Elle." The reflection smiled faintly. "No. I'm the reason Elle ever existed." The others watched in silence as Eleanor touched the mirror. It was warm. Then, a hairline crack appeared, starting from the base and climbing slowly up toward the top. The reflection blurred. Then sharpened again. Only now. It was Graves. Standing behind her reflection. Staring back at her. Ezra stepped forward. "What the hell?" Eleanor's voice was soft. "He's in there." Jonathan moved to her side. "Is it him, or just the version the story remembered?" Eleanor didn't answer. She touched the cracked glass again. It splintered into a perfect spiderweb, and the mirror fell inward, revealing a passage. They stepped through. The corridor on the other side was not a printing press, or a theater, or an alley. It was something in between. Backstage. A place that looked like no place, a long corridor lined with doors labeled in faded gold leaf. Act 1, the accountant. Act 2, the widow. Act 3, the scholar. Act 9, the reader. Act 10, the double. Act 11, the rewrite. Act 12, the end. Eleanor paused before the last door. There was no handle. Only a phrase carved into the wood. "Only the penholder may open." She reached into her coat pocket. Pulled out the old theater pen. And watched as the door unlocked with a whisper. They entered what looked like an old dressing room, dusty mirrors, crumbling costumes, candle stubs lining the vanity. But on the vanity's surface, a copy of Rehearsals. Bound in deep navy leather. Title scrawled in gold. Version 2. Eleanor opened it. Inside, new scenes. Not the ones she had written. Not the ones they'd found. But scenes she had lived. Her first meeting with Graves. Her first case. Her first time doubting what she saw in the mirror. She turned to the last page. Blank. Waiting. Only one line sat at the top. And now, she decides who she is. Ezra watched her closely. You're not just the reader anymore. Jonathan nodded. You're the rewrite. Eleanor looked at the pen. Then at the page. And for the first time, she said it aloud. I'm not following the story anymore. I'm rewriting it. Chapter 14, Version 2. The pages were silent. Not blank, but expectant. As though they already knew what she was going to write. As though they were listening. Eleanor sat at the vanity in the hidden room, the old pen poised above the journal labeled Version 2. The only light came from a single wall sconce flickering above her, casting gold and shadow across the cracked mirror. Behind her, Ezra stood guard at the door. Jonathan leaned against the frame of an antique wardrobe, arms folded, watching her with quiet tension. They all knew, this wasn't about chasing a killer anymore. This was about controlling the narrative before it consumed them. Eleanor drew in a breath, touched the pen to the first empty line. Scene 11, the rewrite begins. The page drank the ink with eagerness. As the words formed, the mirror across from her began to ripple, like water disturbed by sound. She wrote again. The reader is no longer an observer. She is the change. She does not write to describe, she writes to define. Behind her, a soft creaking. Jonathan turned. One of the dressing room doors had slowly opened itself. Behind it, a hallway of reflections. Not real rooms. Moments. Ezra stepped toward one. What the hell is this? Inside the door's frame, a vision, Eleanor in the archives of the British Library, months ago. But she wasn't reading. She was being watched. By Graves. But in this version, he wore different clothes. A different watch. A different expression, like he didn't know her yet. Or like she didn't know him. They moved from vision to vision. One showed Eleanor receiving the Box 13 journal on her own, without the team. Another showed Ezra as the detective, and Graves as the one who vanished early. A third showed Jonathan never meeting Graves at all, still a professor, still lost in books. Eleanor's breath caught. These are alternative drafts, she whispered. Versions of us that never happened. Or haven't happened yet. Jonathan muttered, this place isn't memory. It's revision. Ezra crossed his arms. And who the hell's doing the revising? Eleanor turned back to the desk. There, on the final page she'd just written. The story doesn't need to be corrected. It needs to be chosen. Ezra spotted it first. A folded piece of paper, half buried beneath the corner of a faded rug. He picked it up. To the rewrite. You are not the first to sit at this desk. But you may be the last to sit with full awareness. Most are written before they can write. But you opened the mirror. You entered willingly. You understand now. This is not a case. This is a draft. What you do next is not about solving the mystery. It's about deciding who gets to tell it. Signed. L. But this signature was different. Below it, scratched faintly in the parchment. E. B. Eleanor stared at the initials. L, she whispered. It was never a single person. Jonathan stepped closer. It was a role. A title. Ezra nodded. Passed from one writer to the next. Reader becomes rewrite. Rewrite becomes author. Eleanor turned to the mirror again. Her reflection didn't smile this time. It simply waited. Her voice was firm. We've been chasing the wrong villain. Jonathan blinked. You think there's no killer? Oh, there was one, she said. But not the kind who uses a knife. The kind who uses a pen. Someone authored death as part of the story. To control the next rewrite. To hand off the title of L. And Graves? Ezra asked. Eleanor turned to him. He figured it out. Too late. Eleanor picked up the pen again. Wrote on the next page. Scene 12, the rewrite refuses the ending. She felt it the moment the ink touched paper. A shiver through the room. The walls adjusted. The lights dimmed. The mirror cracked in reverse. And something stepped through. Not Graves. Not Eleanor's reflection. But a tall figure in a long coat, face obscured, holding an old, worn script binder. The title. The rewrite must not win. Ezra drew his blade. Jonathan reached for the revolver in the drawer. But Eleanor raised a hand. No. She walked forward, past the broken mirror, past the versions of herself in other lives. To the figure. And took the binder. The figure nodded once, and vanished into paper. Eleanor returned to the desk. Laid the binder next to version 2. And opened it. Inside, the true final scene. The rewrite breaks the cycle. Not with ink. Not with death. But with a decision no one else was ever allowed to make. She closes the book. Eleanor lifted the pen. Paused. And wrote. Scene 13, no curtain. No fall. We leave. We live. We choose. Chapter 15, the exit not written. The pen left the page. The ink dried in silence. And for the first time since stepping into the strange backstage world of rehearsals, Eleanor Blackwood felt something unfamiliar. Stillness. Not quiet, not peace, but stillness. As if the entire story had been holding its breath. Ezra and Jonathan stood on either side of the ruined mirror, watching her. No lights flickered. No doors creaked. No reflections moved on their own. Because Eleanor had just done something unforgivable. She had refused to finish the script. The dressing room shifted around them, subtly at first. The shadows flattened, the corners softened, the air lost its warmth. Where once were doors labeled with acts and scenes, now stood one wall, smooth and featureless. Only a single inscription carved into the plaster. The exit must be earned. Jonathan stepped forward. What does that mean? Eleanor placed her hand on the wall. It was cold. But pulsing, faint, rhythmic. Like a heartbeat behind a locked door. She stepped back and opened the worn script binder the cloaked figure had given her. Inside, a single line remained. To escape, the rewrite must remove herself. Ezra frowned. Remove herself from what? Eleanor whispered, from the story. They returned to the flat on Marlowe Street just before dawn. No one spoke for several minutes. The fire was cold in the hearth. The sky beyond the windows began to pale. Then Jonathan broke the silence. If you remove yourself from the story, he said, what happens to the script? It ends, Ezra said. Like turning off the lantern. Story dies, light goes out. Eleanor shook her head. No. That's what the last author wanted me to believe. That I had to disappear for the narrative to conclude. She placed version 2 beside the original journal. The mistake they made wasn't writing the ending, she said softly. It was writing me into it. The next night, Eleanor returned to St. Bartholomew's Theatre, alone. She entered through the rear alley door Graves had once used. The main hall was empty. Covered in dust. Not a soul stirred in the balconies. And yet, when she stepped on stage, she heard it. A faint echo of applause. But no audience. No lights. Just memory. A memory trying desperately to make her perform. She stepped center stage. A spotlight bloomed above her, though no hand turned it on. She said nothing. Instead, she opened version 2. And tore the page labeled Scene 13 in half. The spotlight flickered, then blinked out. The stage was dark again. In the wings, a door waited. It had never been there before. Small. Gray. Plain. Carved into its surface, last rewrite. She opened it. Inside, a small, square room. Wooden walls. One table. One chair. And at the center, a letter. Addressed to her. She opened it. You didn't finish the story. Good. You didn't kill your reflection. Better. You walked off stage. You earned what we never could. Step through the page, and you're free. Eleanor looked behind her. No one followed. She placed the letter back on the table. And smiled. She left the theater without a script. Without a shadow. Without a role. And when she returned to Marlowe Street, the desk was still there. The ink bottle was dry. The Box 13 journal was closed. She did not open it. She sat instead with Jonathan and Ezra. And said, "We've told their story long enough. Let's write our own." Chapter 16, A Case Not Chosen. 2 weeks passed. No new pages appeared. No letters arrived. No spotlights flickered to life. The play had ended. But Eleanor Blackwood could still feel the silence it left behind, thick as fog, heavy as grief. Not the grief of death, but of absence. The kind you feel when something you've carried, dangerous, but defining, is suddenly gone. Gone, but not forgotten. Because the story had stopped asking her to play a part. And begun waiting for her to make a move. The Morning Post arrived like any other. But nestled between a circular from Scotland Yard and a bill from a Baker Street bookseller was a single unmarked envelope. No seal. No return address. No ink on the front, only a faint impression, as if pressed by a gloved hand. Eleanor opened it carefully. Inside, a folded card, cream-colored, with thick borders. On the inside, in perfect handwriting. If you're done rewriting someone else's story, would you like to investigate one of your own? And below it, a name. Inspector Roland Keswick. Scotland Yard, Cold Case Division. Office 3B, Rathbone Lane. Ezra leaned over her shoulder, reading the note upside down. "Well," he said. "That's suspiciously ordinary." Jonathan, sipping coffee by the window, murmured, "Which makes it the most dangerous invitation we've had yet." Rathbone Lane was narrow, wet with morning rain, and largely forgotten by most of London. The building that housed Scotland Yard's Cold Case Division looked more like a civil records archive than a place of active investigation. Inside, Eleanor, Jonathan, and Ezra were led to a third-floor office, where a tall, silver-haired man stood beside a cluttered desk, pinning faded newspaper clippings to a corkboard. Inspector Keswick turned, offering a curt nod. "Ms. Blackwood. Mr. Whitmore. Mr. Renwick. I was told you might be receptive." "To what?" Eleanor asked. Keswick reached for a thin file. Slid it across the desk. "Something old," he said. "But not dead." The file contained photographs, grainy, black and white, decades old. 6 faces. Different ages. Different backgrounds. All gone within the same square mile. All vanished within the same 3-week window. All from 1936. Ezra frowned. "You want us to investigate ghosts?" Keswick shook his head. I want you to investigate a pattern. He pulled another folder from the drawer. More photos. Disappearances in 1958. Again in 1972. Then 1997. And again, 3 years ago. 6 people. Every time. Vanished. No remains. No sightings. Same radius. Same time frame. Same silence. Jonathan murmured, every 20 to 25 years. Like a loop. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. What ties them together? Keswick tapped a finger on the oldest photo in the file. The first 6 victims? All patrons of a now-demolished theater in Harper Square. Ezra let out a low breath. Oh no, he muttered. Not another theater. Keswick handed Eleanor a faded blueprint. It showed the layout of Harper Square, beneath it, a sub-basement from the original Apollo House Theater, long since buried under post-war renovations. There's nothing above it now but a wine merchant and a closed cafe, Keswick said. But the theater's bones are still there. The city never properly filled it in. Jonathan leaned forward. What's down there now? Keswick's voice was flat. No one knows. It's sealed. But the timing lines up. We're 12 weeks from the next 25-year mark. Eleanor closed the file. We're going to need access. Lights. Maps. Keswick handed her a key. I thought you'd say that. That night, back at Marlowe Street, Eleanor stood by the fire. No rehearsals manuscript. No mirror. No ink-stained quills. Just a key. And a cold case tied to an empty theater and a clock ticking toward repetition. Ezra tossed a small notebook on the table. You sure we want to get involved in another mystery with buried trapdoors and people vanishing into walls? Jonathan added softly, this one doesn't feel staged. There's no storybook quality to it. It just feels wrong. Eleanor met their eyes. That's the point, she said. It's not a performance anymore. It's real. She picked up the key. And turned to them both. Ready to go underground? Chapter 17, The Forgotten House. Fog curled low along the cobblestones of Harper Square as night fell, quiet, expectant. The square was nothing remarkable, an iron fence enclosing a mostly disused plaza, a shuttered cafe with peeling signage, and a wine shop that hadn't opened in months. No signs of theater. No applause. No curtain. But beneath it all, history waited. Eleanor Blackwood stood with Jonathan and Ezra at the rusted service entrance behind the cafe. The key from Inspector Keswick fit perfectly into the lock, groaning as it turned. Behind the door, stone stairs, steep and narrow, descending into shadows. Ezra adjusted the lantern on his belt. Anyone want to guess what kind of surprise waits in a place like this? Jonathan muttered, hopefully not another manuscript. Eleanor said nothing. She stepped forward first. And descended into the dark. The air changed after the 5th step. Cooler. Drier. Thick with the smell of old paint, burned velvet, and time. The stairwell opened into a long corridor with high ceilings and ornate plasterwork. The floor beneath their boots was warped wood, soft in places, groaning with every step. At the end of the corridor, a set of double doors, cracked open. Carved above them, Apollo House. Jonathan held his lantern high. I thought the entire building was demolished after the war. Eleanor pushed the doors open. No, she said. It was sealed. The doors opened into a vast, dust-choked lobby. Marble floors. A ruined chandelier. Ticket booths with shattered glass. Everything frozen. A painting on the wall showed a playbill from 1936. Now showing, The Other Side of Silence. By Alistair Graves. Ezra paused. That name again. Jonathan stepped closer. But that wasn't Alistair. We've seen the name passed down before. It's a title. Eleanor murmured, or a warning. There was a smell in the air now. Not rot. Ink. Someone had been here. Recently. They moved through the halls of the old theater like ghosts retracing a life they never lived, past dressing rooms still lined with broken makeup mirrors, past velvet benches with initials carved into the arms. At last, they reached the main theater. The auditorium was breathtaking, even in ruin. Rows of red-cushioned seats coated in dust. Gilded balconies draped in cobwebs. A velvet curtain drawn back to reveal a stage that had never been stripped away. It was all still here. Unchanged. Waiting. Jonathan whispered, "It feels like the cast just stepped out between acts." Ezra swept his light across the wings. No cast. But someone's been here. He crouched at the edge of the stage and picked up a glass bottle, empty but clean. Inside, a single match. Beside it, a note. Folded. Ink still drying. Eleanor read it aloud. "Welcome to Scene 1. The room was silent. Until a creak echoed from the balcony above. They turned together, lanterns rising, catching the faintest outline of a figure, standing perfectly still at the center of the upper gallery. No face. Just a silhouette in a coat and gloves. And a glint of white paper in one hand. Eleanor called out, "Who are you?" No answer. Ezra reached for his revolver. "I can end that question real fast." "Wait," Eleanor said. "This isn't an attack." The figure raised its arm, slowly. And dropped the paper over the balcony. It fluttered down like a falling curtain. Eleanor caught it midair. On the front, a theater stub. Apollo House, one night only. The Other Side of Silence. Admit one, reader. On the back. You closed the book. But not the house. And now that you're inside, you'll have to stay for the whole performance. Eleanor looked up. The balcony was empty. They rushed back through the corridors. But every exit, every stairwell, every servant's passage, was sealed behind rusted metal or crumbled stone. No wind. No sound. No time. Only the theater. Eleanor stood on the empty stage, reading the ticket stub again. "We didn't come here by accident," she said. "We were brought." Ezra stepped beside her, jaw clenched. "So what's the plan?" She looked around the ruined auditorium. "Find Scene 2, she said. "Before it finds us." Chapter 18, The Other Side of Silence. The theater held its breath. Eleanor stood at center stage, the faded stub in her hand, echoing with the weight of the message. "Now that you're inside, you'll have to stay for the whole performance." Ezra's voice cut through the stillness. "This isn't a note. It's a threat." Jonathan adjusted his lantern. "Or an instruction." "No," Eleanor murmured. "It's a contract." A distant chime rang out. Soft, musical, impossible to trace. Then the lights flickered to life, dim overheads casting a sickly amber hue over the seats, the curtains, the ceiling. The stage beneath them creaked. Words appeared above the proscenium in glowing gold letters, one by one. Act 2, The Other Side of Silence. The theater responded. Somewhere, deep within the walls, came the sound of gears turning, stage machinery untouched for decades groaning back to life. Jonathan turned slowly. "We're inside the performance," Eleanor whispered, "and we've just been cued." The curtains behind the stage stirred, drawn apart by no visible hand. Beyond them, a narrow passage, backstage. But now, lit by a faint red glow, like footlights beneath the boards. Ezra led the way, revolver in hand, as the three moved into the narrow corridor behind the curtain. They passed faded cue cards, empty costume racks, props covered in canvas. Until they reached the prompt box, a small booth for the stage manager once hidden stage left. A fresh page lay inside. Not yellowed. Not old. Typed. You have stepped into scene 2. This is not your story, but you may speak. Not to each other. To the house. Eleanor's breath caught. To the theater? Jonathan murmured, the theater itself is the audience. As they stepped back onto the main stage, something changed. They heard it. A sound faint as breath, like an entire audience whispering at once. But when they turned their lights to the gallery, it was empty. Still, the whispers grew louder the moment they crossed center stage. Words. Barely audible. Not angry. Not mocking. Just, repeating. Ezra turned slowly in place. They're saying the same phrase. Over and over. Eleanor closed her eyes and listened closely. Speak your silence. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. One spotlight flared to life, on a chair now placed center stage. Where it had not been before. A single paper program rested on its seat. Eleanor approached. The program bore a single line. Tonight's guest performer, Eleanor Blackwood. And inside, handwritten in deep blue ink. Act 2 is memory. Not yours. Speak aloud what does not belong to you. Or it will remain yours forever. Eleanor looked around. No script, she said quietly. But I have to speak. Jonathan frowned. Speak what? Something that isn't mine, she whispered. But that I carry. Eleanor sat in the chair. The whispers stopped. The house lights faded to black. Only the spotlight remained. A pulse beat beneath the floorboards. She looked forward, toward the invisible crowd. And spoke. I wasn't the one who saw the first scene. Graves did. But I kept it. I held it. I made it mine when I should have let it stay his. I wasn't the one who heard the name, L, first. I inherited it. Took it. But I didn't earn it. And I wasn't meant to be the writer. But I kept the pen. Silence. Then. The spotlight snapped off. The theater shook once, gently, as if exhaling. And a door opened in the side wall of the stage. Where no door had ever been before. They stepped through the doorway into darkness, into a hall that curved downward, deeper underground. Paintings lined the walls. Faded posters. Programs from performances no one remembered. At the end, a locked cabinet of glass. Inside, 6 folded slips of paper. Each bearing a name. Horace Ellison. Abigail Norridge. Jonathan Whitmore. Ezra Renwick. Alistair Graves. Eleanor Blackwood. Ezra's voice was low. It's a cast list. Jonathan swallowed. But why is mine in there? Eleanor stepped closer to the cabinet. All 6 names were typed. All 6 fates unwritten. Only one slip of paper was blank. Waiting. Chapter 19, the cast is complete. The underground chamber pulsed with quiet tension. Behind the stage, far beneath Harper Square, the forgotten theater had led them here, a hallway with painted walls and flickering lamps, lined with relics from a century of vanished performances. At its end stood the glass cabinet, faintly lit from within. Inside, 6 paper slips. 5 bore names typed in stark black ink. Horace Ellison. Abigail Norridge. Jonathan Whitmore. Ezra Renwick. Alistair Graves. The 6th slip was blank. Waiting. Eleanor stared at it, heart beating a slow rhythm beneath her ribs. Ezra's voice broke the silence. This some kind of prophecy? Jonathan whispered, or a final casting call? Ezra examined the case. Why are Graves and Norwich listed? They're already dead. Jonathan murmured, are they? Technically, they disappeared. Like the others. Like the victims tied to this place over the years. Eleanor nodded. Because this isn't about murder. It's about absorption. Ezra frowned. Into what? Eleanor stepped forward, eyes fixed on the 6th slip. Into the story. The one that keeps rewriting itself through people, through memories, through roles. This cabinet isn't a memorial. It's a script binder. Each person here was written in. And one of us is about to be written out. Jonathan spotted a lever beside the cabinet, dusty but clean around its edges. Clearly touched. Recently. He turned to Eleanor. This must trigger something. Or end something, Ezra muttered. But Eleanor didn't hesitate. She reached forward and pulled the lever. The glass of the cabinet shimmered briefly, then hissed open with a whisper of air. Inside, the 6th slip remained untouched. Still blank. Until they looked again. And saw, faintly, as if written in water and only now drying, a name begin to form. Letter by letter. Jonathan Whitmore. No, Eleanor whispered. Jonathan stepped back in disbelief. But I didn't. The lights overhead flickered violently. The hallway behind them groaned. A low rumbling echoed up from beneath the floor, like a curtain rail sliding open across the earth. Ezra drew his revolver, though he knew it was pointless. I don't think we get to argue with the script. Jonathan shook his head. I didn't write anything. I didn't speak anything. You didn't have to, Eleanor said quietly. The story knew. You were part of it the moment you stepped on stage. And now it wants your scene. With a slow, grinding crack, the wall behind the cabinet shifted open, revealing a new corridor beyond, a short one, lit by a single swinging bulb. At its end, a heavy velvet curtain. And behind the curtain? A faint sound. Pages turning. Paper fluttering. Eleanor turned to Jonathan. We don't let it take you. He nodded, but his voice was steady. I'm going. Ezra grabbed his arm. Like hell you are. Jonathan gently pulled free. If it's me, then maybe the only way out is to go through. He looked at Eleanor. And if you get the chance, rewrite the ending. Jonathan stepped through the corridor alone. The curtain swallowed him whole. Eleanor and Ezra stared after him. Then, the curtain parted again. Only now, they could see the stage. A spotlight flared. Jonathan stood at its center, motionless. Before him, a table. On it, a blank page. A voice, not his, not Eleanor's, spoke from the darkness. Write your exit. Or we will. Jonathan sat at the table. Took the pen. And began to write. Back in the hallway, the cabinet closed. The 6th slip no longer glowed. But the name was now sealed in perfect black ink. The case clicked once. A soft voice echoed through the stone. Act 3 will begin shortly. Eleanor turned to Ezra. We're not the authors anymore. Ezra replied, no. But we might still be the critics. She looked at the cabinet. And whispered. Then let's review the hell out of it. Chapter 20, Write Your Exit. The spotlight held Jonathan Whitmore in its golden grasp like a spider's thread, delicate, fragile, and tight enough to crush. He sat alone at the writing desk at the center of the theater stage, deep beneath Harper Square. The house was dark. The balconies empty. No orchestra. No audience. Just the pressure of the unseen, watching. Waiting. The page before him was cream-colored, thick with tooth and tension. The pen was old. Heavy. The nib glinted with wet ink, fresh, though no inkwell sat nearby. Etched into the top of the page in faded gold leaf. Final draft, Scene 3. Underneath, a prompt had already appeared. State your character. Define your purpose. Then write how you leave. Jonathan blinked hard. It's a eulogy. He picked up the pen with shaking hands. And began to write. I am Jonathan Whitmore. Archivist. Historian. Companion to the detective who vanished. Reader of mysteries I was never meant to solve. I followed the story into the mirror, and I followed it out again. I followed it into the theater, and now I follow it here. As he wrote, ink bled beyond his words, uncontrolled, curling into phrases he didn't form, but recognized. You stayed too long. You knew too much. You read pages not written for you. He stopped writing. The pen refused to lift. His hand moved without command. He was being written through. Ezra pounded a fist against the wall as the curtain slammed shut again. We can't just stand here. Eleanor pressed her hand flat against the velvet. It vibrated faintly, pulsing like a heart. She turned to the props bin, old costumes, tools, shattered glass, and pulled out a cracked lantern. Inside it, a matchbox. Still dry. She struck a flame and held it to the velvet curtain. The fire took instantly. Ezra's eyes widened. You're burning the script. No, she said. I'm burning the scene. On stage, Jonathan saw the flame appear at the curtain's edge. Heat pressed against his back. Shadows danced in the rows of empty seats. The page before him shuddered, as though the theater itself were choking. He shouted over the rising hiss of fire. I don't want an ending. I want a door. The ink on the page bubbled, darkened. The prompt vanished. And in its place appeared a single phrase. Then write it. He seized the pen and scrawled. Exit, through memory not lived. The moment the final period landed. The stage cracked open beneath him. A trapdoor yawned wide. But instead of darkness, it revealed a staircase, wrought iron, spiraling down. Jonathan didn't hesitate. He ran. Above him, the fire engulfed the velvet, the stage boards, the scaffolding. The theater howled. Not like a building dying. Like something ancient being dragged away. The spiral staircase led to a hidden room, a small, circular vault, lined in bookshelves carved from theater props. In the center, a glass case. Inside it, the first script of rehearsals. A mirror, fractured into 3 shards. And a photograph of 6 people, seated in theater seats. The cast. But one seat was empty. And someone had scrawled across the bottom. One always exits. One always returns. One always remembers. Jonathan looked down at his hands. The ink was gone. He had written his exit. And he had not disappeared. The fire raged above. But through the trapdoor, Eleanor and Ezra climbed down into the vault, coughing but alive. Eleanor grabbed Jonathan and pulled him into an embrace before he could say a word. Ezra stared at the case. What is this place? Jonathan looked at the photograph. "It's the green room of the story," he said. "Where the ones who break the script get sent. And maybe, where the next one gets chosen." Chapter 21, The Story Behind the Stage. The fire above had consumed the theater's rafters, balconies, and velvet heart. But it had not touched the vault. Beneath the ashes and forgotten trapdoors, in the chamber hidden under the stage, Eleanor, Jonathan, and Ezra stood in a room that felt outside time. The shelves rose like ribs. Everything here was theater, but wrong. Props half melted into pages. Books with stage directions instead of chapters. Mirrors wrapped in script pages. And in the center, the glass case. Jonathan pressed a hand to the glass. Inside lay a manuscript, unlike any they'd seen before. Its cover bore no title, just a symbol burned into the leather, a quill, crossed with a mask. Eleanor leaned in. "We've seen that before, in Graves' original notebook." Ezra grunted. The same sigil marked the trapdoor in the Ash Grove Theater too. Jonathan opened the case. It didn't resist. He lifted the manuscript, fragile, aged, but humming with impossible warmth, like a coal that never cooled. Inside, the first page read: Theater Archive, Volume 0. Compiled by L. Edited by Unknown. They flipped through carefully. The script was structured like a play, but it didn't follow any structure known to the stage. Each act was a real event, a disappearance, a performance, a murder. 1874, The Ash Grove Vanishings. 1936, The Harper Square 6. 1958, The Play That Closed Itself. 1997, The Lost Reader. And then, 2024, The Rewrite Arrives. Jonathan stopped cold. "That's us," he said. "Right now." Beneath the heading. Starring Eleanor Blackwood, as herself. Starring Jonathan Whitmore, as the scholar. Starring Ezra Renwick, as the knife in the wings. Ezra muttered, "Well, I suppose that's flattering." Eleanor whispered, "It's not prophecy." She tapped the paper. "It's observation." Behind them, a breeze stirred, impossible in a sealed room. A book fell from one of the higher shelves, landing with a heavy thud. They turned. Nothing there. But Eleanor walked over, picked it up. The title, The Silent Stage. Inside, blank pages. Dozens. Hundreds. Except for one. At the very center. In perfectly etched ink. "I do not write the scenes. I archive what the story chooses to keep. One act is always erased. One must always survive." Jonathan read it aloud. "Then who's writing now?" No one answered. But in the corner of the vault, something shimmered. A hidden panel slowly slid open. Beyond it, a staircase. Narrow. Crumbling. Lit by flickering gaslights no one had ignited. The walls bore theater posters. All of them the same title. The Other Side of Silence. But the dates were different. Hundreds of them. Performances spanning more than a century. Ezra touched one. This play was never cancelled. Just recast. Jonathan asked, "But why? Why keep performing it?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She walked halfway down the stairs. There, on the landing, etched in the wall with chalk. The script ends when no one speaks the next line. She turned to the others. "We end it not by escaping," she said. "But by refusing to perform." They descended into the next chamber. A second theater. Smaller. Circular. Private. Lit by dozens of lanterns. Empty chairs arranged in a perfect ring. And in the center, a desk. Waiting. Eleanor whispered, "It's a final stage." Jonathan nodded. But no actors. Ezra looked around. No audience. Eleanor slowly stepped toward the desk. But this time, she did not pick up the pen. She sat quietly, folded her hands, and waited. A page appeared on the desk by itself. The last one in the archive. Jonathan read it aloud. Act 4, Silence. No lines. No cast. No ending. Just the sound of nothing, finally being heard. Chapter 22, The Last Line. The air inside the final chamber was weightless. No dust. No scent of ink or old wood. Just quiet. Eleanor, Jonathan, and Ezra stood in the round theater beneath the vault, encircled by empty chairs and lanterns flickering without heat. The desk in the center remained still. On it, a single page. Untouched. At the top. Act 4, Silence. Beneath it, nothing. No stage directions. No dialogue. No prompt. Ezra's voice was low, reverent. "We've reached the bottom of the script." Jonathan stepped forward, peering at the page. "Or the edge of it." Eleanor nodded. "The final line isn't missing." She touched her chest. "It's ours to speak. Or not at all." A low hum stirred the room. Like a chorus inhaling in unison. On the curved walls of the chamber, shadows began to form, faint silhouettes seated in the empty chairs. Not solid. Not spectral. Just impressions. A woman in a beaded opera gown. A man with a cravat and cigarette holder. A child clutching a folded program. An old critic with a velvet notebook. Jonathan whispered, "It's the audience." Ezra looked around. "No, it's every audience. Everyone who ever watched this play and disappeared." Eleanor stepped to the center. They were absorbed into the archive. Kept alive through performance. She turned in a slow circle. "And now they wait for us to finish it." Eleanor looked at the pen on the desk. Then at the page. The shadows leaned forward slightly. Waiting. Ezra reached for her shoulder. "You don't have to." She nodded. "I know." She picked up the pen. Paused. And laid it back down. "No ending." She whispered it aloud. "No more scenes." The shadows around the chamber began to tremble. Lanterns flickered. But Eleanor didn't move. "You don't get closure," she said. "You don't get catharsis. You get nothing. Because that's what you made everyone else become." The room shuddered. Shadows dissolved like candle smoke. The lanterns winked out, one by one. The walls cracked. A wind rose, not from any direction, but from inside the script itself, as though the final scene was screaming silently at its erasure. Jonathan grabbed the manuscript from the floor. Pages flipped wildly, then stopped. And on the last page, ink bloomed like blood. Not words. A name. Alistair Graves. Above them, a beam of golden light opened in the ceiling, like a trapdoor had been reversed. Not firelight. Sunlight. Eleanor turned upward, blinking. Ezra grabbed her arm. "That's daylight. That's real." Jonathan whispered, "It's the only exit the story can't control." They ran. Climbing a staircase that hadn't been there moments before, spiraling up through time, through story, through memory. As they emerged into the ruined shell of the Harper Square Theater, morning light poured through the crumbling rafters. The sky above was pale. Empty. Free. The theater behind them collapsed into silence. True silence. Not paused. Not waiting. Finished. Later, back at Marlowe Street, the three sat quietly in the study. The Box 13 journal remained sealed on the shelf. The pen was cold. The fire burned steady. Jonathan finally broke the silence. "Do you think it's over?" Eleanor stood, walked to the desk, and opened the drawer. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. Blank. At the top, she wrote in calm, even letters. "The Marlowe Street Murders. A play in 22 acts." She folded the paper. And said, "Yes. Because we chose not to write the last line." Chapter 23, The Scene That Wasn't There. Days passed. Then weeks. London moved on. The Harper Square fire was blamed on old electrical wiring beneath the cobblestones. The reports made no mention of a stage, no audience, no vanished centuries of performances. No one but Eleanor, Jonathan, and Ezra remembered what truly happened beneath the square. And even they struggled to believe it. Because nothing followed. No invitations. No whispers. No ink that bled into pages that shouldn't exist. The story had stopped. Or so they thought. On a rain-streaked Thursday morning, Eleanor stepped into the study to find the fireplace cold and the windows fogged. But the desk drawer was open. She didn't remember opening it. Inside, no envelope. No page. Just the scent of ink. And the impression of writing pressed into the bottom of the drawer. She leaned close. Held a blank sheet of paper over the indentations. Then gently shaded it with the side of a pencil. Lines emerged. Invisible until now. A message, faint, tentative. There is a scene that was never archived. One that didn't belong to the theater. Because it belonged to you. Across the room, Jonathan, ever the archivist, had taken up residence in Eleanor's personal collection of rare books. He was cataloging the volumes when he stumbled across something curious. A thin, gray-bound booklet titled The Margins. He didn't recall ever seeing it before. It had no author. No publishing date. No copyright. Just the title, and, handwritten on the inside cover, in Graves' old style. To be read only after the final act is refused. Inside, the book was filled with fractured lines. Fragments of scenes. Half-written dialogue. Stage directions struck through with red ink. Moments that never made it into rehearsals, or the other side of silence. Jonathan read aloud. A key dropped in the snow, never picked up. A theater patron who arrives before the play is written. A detective who refuses to be remembered. A story so quiet, it rewrites its audience instead of its characters. He stopped. Looked up. "This isn't just an unfinished script," he said. "It's a residual consciousness." Eleanor turned slowly. "A ghost?" Jonathan shook his head. "A memory with no story to belong to." Later that night, Eleanor sat at her desk. The journal of Box 13 remained sealed. She hadn't opened it since the day they walked out of Harper Square. But now, something pulled her toward it. She flipped it open. All the pages were blank, clean, pure, untouched. Except one. Near the end. There, in black ink. Scene 23, the story that survived its ending. And below it. Written by no one. Told by everyone. Ezra entered, reading over her shoulder. "That page wasn't there before." Eleanor nodded. "I didn't write it." Jonathan stepped in behind them. "But we did something worse." Eleanor looked up. "We left the stage, but kept the story." That night, The team gathered around the fireplace, a blank page on the table between them. Eleanor held the pen. It felt different now. Lighter. Less like a weapon. More like a choice. "I thought the archive was the final layer," she said. Jonathan shook his head. "It was the deepest layer. Not the last." Ezra grinned. "So what's below that?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "Whatever we write next." She placed the pen on the table. Not in fear, but in invitation. In the corner of a mirror, long since cracked and darkened, a faint silhouette lingered. It did not move. It did not speak. But in the reflection, on the glass, a message wrote itself in fog. "Scene 24 has already begun." And behind that figure, a door. Slightly open.
Every mystery leaves a mark. And the next case is already unfolding. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe, like, and share. There are more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Join us in the next chapter of A Study in Secrets.